Thranduil was one of the most influential and striking elven lords of the Third Age, and notably the only elven ruler of that time to officially bear the title of king. His realm in Mirkwood was, by the standards of a waning era, still populous, and he stubbornly held back the advance of Sauron's dark forces. Yet despite the common cause, Thranduil kept his distance from the other elven rulers who also fought the Dark Lord. He was never invited to the White Council, never consulted on strategic plans, and never shared in their intelligence reports. At first glance, this might look like exile, but the truth was more complex. Most likely, Thranduil himself preferred to avoid close contact, especially with Galadriel and Elrond. The reason lay not only in his pride. Deeper still was a rift rooted in a 1,000-year feud between two great elven kindreds, the Sindar and the Noldor. Thranduil was of Sindarin descent, while Galadriel, and to some extent Elrond, were of the Noldor, and not just any Noldor, but of the clan of the Exiles, whose deeds had left deep scars in the memory of his people. Let us trace the origin of this animosity. In the years of the trees, the Noldor dwelt in Aman under the protection of the Valar. But after Morgoth stole the Silmarils from them, many, including Galadriel, chose to leave the Blessed Realm to reclaim the lost jewels and win independence. The problem was that the Noldor had no ships. For vessels, they turned to the Teleri, master shipwrights dwelling on Aemon's shores. The Teleri refused to help, obeying the will of the Valar. Then some of the Noldor attacked the Teleri, killing many and seizing their fleet. Though Galadriel took no part in the slaughter, her close kin were among the attackers. For Thranduil, this held personal weight. The Sindar, to whom he belonged, were distant kin of the Teleri. Their first king, Thingol, was the brother of the Telerin ruler in Aman. In Sindarin eyes, the Noldor had committed a bloody betrayal that could never be forgiven. When the Noldor came to Middle-earth, they settled in Beleriand, lands ruled by Thingol, king of the Sindar, whose vassals included Thranduil's father, Orifer, and Thranduil himself. Some Noldor acknowledged Thingol's authority, but many deemed him too proud and refused to submit. They founded their own realms without asking permission, a grave insult to the Sindar. Galadriel seemed an exception. She lived at Thingol's court, learned from his wife Melian, and married Celeborn, a relative of Thingol. Yet in elven culture, kinship bonds meant too much. The guilt of a house fell upon all its members. Conflicts did not end there. One of the Silmarils came into the possession of Thingol's grandson Dior. When he refused to give it to Fëanor's sons, they invaded Doriath, destroyed it, and carried out another massacre. Thranduil and his father barely escaped, fleeing east with a group of refugees into Greenwood the Great. There, they took leadership over the local Nandor Elves, but the memory of their lost homeland and of the Noldor's role in that loss never faded. In the Second Age, Thranduil was forced to cooperate with the Noldor again. When Gil-galad and his herald Elrond called the Elves of Mirkwood to war against Sauron, Orifer and Thranduil agreed. Yet on the battlefield, they refused to follow Noldorin orders, choosing to fight independently. The result was catastrophic. The Mirkwood army was surrounded, and half their number, including Orifer, fell. Thranduil survived, but he likely never forgave Elrond and his allies for their part in the disaster, even if some blame lay with himself. Still, during the War of the Ring, Thranduil managed to set aside past grievances. His forces aided the Men of Dale and the dwarves of Erebor in repelling the Easterling invasions. After Sauron's fall, he took part in the liberation of Mirkwood and the destruction of Dol Guldur, fighting side by side with Galadriel and Celeborn. With Círdan the shipwright, ruler of the Grey Havens and a descendant of the Teleri, Thranduil had no cause for enmity. They were of close kindreds, though little is recorded of their dealings. Celeborn, as a kinsman of Thingol, stood formally higher in rank than Thranduil, yet in war they acted as equal allies. In the end, Thranduil remained a figure who could balance pride with pragmatism. He remembered old wounds, but for the sake of his people's future, he was willing to fight alongside even those he did not trust. Well then, the continuation could be framed as the unknown pages of Thranduil's history, scarcely mentioned in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but adding depth to his character. I could weave in legends, conjectures of Middle-earth's chroniclers, and unspoken episodes that explain why he acted as he did in key moments. Thranduil's story is usually told in fragments. We see him at the imprisonment of Thorin, at council with Bard, and in battles against Sauron. But what transpired in his realm during the long centuries when the chronicles fall silent? These quiet periods often reveal more about a ruler than the loudest wars. After fleeing Doriath and settling in Greenwood, Thranduil and Orifer encountered a world unlike their former home. The Nandor, who had dwelt there for ages, had no grand palaces or complex hierarchies. Their lives were intertwined with the forest's rhythm. Thranduil, raised in Doriath's refined culture, at first saw them more as subjects than equals, but the years changed him. Gradually he came to understand that Mirkwood was not merely a place to live. It was a living, almost sentient force, responding to the intent of those who dwelt within it. The forest's legends told of an ancient spirit, Nornal, born at the first sunrise, who had seen the first elves walk its mossy paths. It was said that Nornal allowed the Sindar and Nandor to merge into one people under Thranduil's rule. This union became the key to the realm's resilience. The forest shielded its own, warned of orc incursions, and hid its settlements from enemy eyes. But this friendship had a price. Thranduil swore never to leave Mirkwood for long, a vow he broke only once during the last alliance. And it was then that he lost his father and nearly all his army. After the War of Wrath, when the sea swept away Beleriand, the surviving Sindar and Nandor were scattered across Middle-earth. Few know that Thranduil and his father wandered long in the lands east of the Blue Mountains before finding Mirkwood. In those wanderings, Thranduil first encountered men, and the experience was bitter. The chronicles tell of a village at the foot of Durin's threshold, where men welcomed them with smiles, only to try selling them to orcs by night, hoping to bargain for their own safety. Thranduil escaped, but from then on he trusted men little, even when they were allies. This mistrust lingered until his meeting with Bard in The Hobbit, when he finally acknowledged that not all men were the same. Even before the events with Thorin, Thranduil had complex dealings with the dwarves of Erebor. There is evidence that half a century before Smaug's arrival, Mirkwood and Erebor had a secret pact. The dwarves supplied Thranduil with weapons forged from their finest alloys, and in return received rare herbs and timber found only in Mirkwood's heart. When Smaug attacked, this alliance broke. Many in Mirkwood blamed Thranduil for it. According to one version, he had refused to send reinforcements when word came of the approaching dragon. The king maintained that the dwarves should defend their own halls, but deep down he may have regretted the decision. That regret might have shaped his behavior during The Hobbit. He did not rush to aid Thorin, but neither did he wish him dead. Few at the time understood that the stronghold of Dol Guldur, built in southern Mirkwood, was but the outer shell of a darkness that seeped into the very earth and trees. Thranduil sensed this before most. The old songs of the forest began to sound distorted. The birds flew north, and even the starlight seemed dimmer. The king ordered the borders fortified and instituted special patrols that later stopped orcs and giant spiders from breaking into the northern lands. But the price was near total isolation. Few could enter Mirkwood without leave. Some elves called it paranoia, but Thranduil knew Sauron was returning and would not let his people share Doriath's fate. The victory over Sauron and the destruction of Dol Guldur marked the dawn of a new era for Mirkwood. The king moved his capital south into the cleansed lands, and for the first time in centuries allowed greater contact with men and dwarves. This did not mean he had forgotten old grudges. Galadriel sailed west, Elrond departed to Valinor, and only Celeborn remained in the east to help with the rebuilding. According to some sources, Thranduil proposed uniting their peoples into one kingdom, but Celeborn refused, preferring to govern the remaining elves of Lothlorien. In Thranduil's later years, children began to be born again in Mirkwood, a rarity in the Third Age. This was seen as a sign of the Valar's blessing, and many elves credited Thranduil for preserving his people when so many other elven kindreds had faded from the world.